Resume recording. So you might have to accept that, everyone. And then I will share our PowerPoint and Marceline will kick us off.
All right. Thank you, everyone. I'm Marceline White. I'm the Executive Director of Economic Action Maryland. And here comes the PowerPoint. And I am thrilled to have Delegate Lorig Charkoudian and Delegate Elizabeth Embry here to share their impressions of the past legislative session. And I also want to tell you what was on our agenda and what passed and what didn't. So I'm looking forward to your comments and questions and looking forward to the discussion. So just a bit of housekeeping. I think we'll go to the next slide and just tell you the agenda really quickly. We are going to be um, just, I'm taking 3 minutes of opening remarks. As Jennifer said, our Deputy Director will take questions in the chat. Then I'll be introducing our guest speakers. I'll come in at the end with my impressions, and then we'll have time for Q&A and wrap up and close. So, um, I think my brief remarks on the opening of session and the session were that it was a perfect storm of challenges. I'd say everyone knows that Maryland, in terms of its budget, is undergoing a contraction, and our legislators had to work very hard to make a series of difficult decisions in terms of the budget. And balance the needs of low income and working families, which is what we care about, with other needs that the state has and keeping roads running and keeping services going. So that was one important issue at the beginning of the session that carried out through the session. And the other, of course, is what was happening at the federal level. And as the session was going on, we were seeing, a rollback of some protections on consumer protections and also around housing and some of the things that our organization works on. And so you really had, at the same time, the loss of jobs for federal workers. So the General Assembly was really grappling with all of these things simultaneously, which created, a very challenging 9 months. Or 9 months. It felt like 9 months, 90 days. So it felt like 9 months sometimes. So that's it. Economic action, who we are. We champion economic rights, equal opportunity, and housing justice. We do it through advocacy in Annapolis and at the municipal level. We conduct our own research and we bring in research and polling, and we provide direct service. Our direct service programs work with many of you and have reached clients in every part of Maryland, supporting older adults, tenant advocacy, and for housing. And a lot of our policy priorities emerge from what we're hearing from folks on the ground, as well as with national partners we work with to try to come up with best practices. So that's a little bit about who we are. And now, our featured speakers. I am really thrilled and grateful to Delegate Charkoudian and Delegate Embry for being here tonight to share their insights about the legislative session. I could spend a long time listing the accomplishments of both delegates, but for the purposes of digging into the session and leaving time for Q&A, I will be brief. Delegate Charkoudian is from District 20, and she has been, I think she was elected in 2018 was her first session, and she is on the Economic Matters Committee, where she chairs the Unemployment Insurance Subcommittee. In 2019, she was awarded from our organization the Up and Coming Legislator of the Year award, which is really something we give to people that we can see in their first term have been doing amazing work on issues we care about, economic issues, consumer protection, energy issues. And since then, she has been leading a great deal of work to make Maryland #1 in the country in terms of its medical debt protections. So we're grateful she's here, and you'll hear about her great energy work as well. And um, Delegate Elizabeth Embry, this is her first term, and She is on the Judiciary Committee in the House, and we've been able to work with her on a number of issues. And last year, she won our Up and Coming Legislator of the Year award. And this year passed important medical debt protections as well as energy protections and some other consumer protections as well. So we're delighted that they're both here. And I think I am going to turn it over to Delegate Charkoudian first to highlight her insights on the session, and then Delegate Embry.
Well, thank you so much, Marceline and Economic Action. And it's so great to be here and so great to be here with Delegate Embry, for whom I have so much respect. It's also good to see so many partners and advocates and organizations, scanning the chat. I know many of you have worked with me and with the General Assembly on many of these issues. And so looking forward to the Q&A and dialogue as well. I have been working, so, Economic Action is a very smart organization. They give us these awards and then we just like have to keep working with them and have to keep working on these issues because otherwise, we'll have, we can't prove them wrong. So, I actually have been working on medical debt issues since I was elected. And I have to say, I mean, this folks will appreciate this. This is like my naive first brand new legislator. I had these conversations with Marceline. We were working on debt issues in general and consumer debt issues, which I think are super important. And we were working on my first year in 2019, we were working on what was it? It was wage garnishment. And we were listening to people say things like, well, was it medical debt or did they buy TV? So is this sort of the judgmental stuff that you hear around consumer debt from people who have never personally struggled to make ends meet, and so don't have an understanding of how one ends up with consumer debt. And so I said to Marceline, well, it looks like there's much less judgment about medical debt. That stuff's easy. Let's do that first. And then we'll come back and do this other stuff. And so that easy stuff we now have spent 7 years doing, and we've made a great deal of progress, but it has not been easy. And we have a ways to go still. But I do want to say, I saw SEIU in the chat here and I saw other groups. I just really can't say enough about the coalition that's been working with us on this. So I'm going to highlight a couple of pieces. We did pass a number of bills over the past few years, and those bills actually led to us being number one in one of the rankings of the sort of best protections. But even once we got that number one spot, you look at the rest of the country and you're like, well, number one may not be so great if most of the country really is in such bad shape in terms of getting sick, leading to economic destitution. And so even once we reach that number one spot, of course, we're, still continuing to work on getting better. So the bill that I worked on this year actually was sort of a culmination of a number of other bills. Every year, when there's things we can't pass, we turn them into studies or we turn them into reports. And this has been an area where the reports that we've gotten actually have been, sometimes they get turned into reports and then, the reports become nothing. And so, but this is an area where we've really been able to use the reports that we've gotten to turn them into legislation. And so one of the things that our reports found, for example, reports that were required based on 2021 legislation, was that the financial assistance, right, which is the crux of how we avoid people being in medical debt to begin with, was somewhat haphazard and very different and somewhat random across the state. So every hospital is required to have free care for people below 200% of poverty, but then between 200 and 500% of poverty, they were required to have reduced cost care, but they could set their own policies on that. And so you could have a situation where you call an ambulance, and if you get taken to this hospital, you are going to pay 50% of the bill. And if you go to that hospital, you're going to pay 70% of the bill or 20% of the bill. And so we decided that we really needed to have floors for each level of poverty. So 200%, 300%, 400%, 500%, so that we would have floors across the state for how much reduced cost care would be. So that passed this year in this session. The second thing that we did in this bill, in my bill, is prohibiting signing under seal, which is a process that when it gets added to a medical billing contract, leads to the window for a lawsuit from the 3 years that are in law to 12 years, the statute of limitation being 12 years. So we prohibited signing under seal. We prohibited reporting to credit agencies, and that became really important because as it became questionable what kind of protections we could count on from the federal government, it became important to put that into state law. We required, and this was a surprising fight to me, that was surprising this was a fight, required that hospitals have patients sign a document saying that they understand what the financial assistance policies are before they're sort of signing documents saying that they understand they're going to have to pay if their insurance doesn't pay. And this was sort of the thing I think I personally celebrated most. We prohibited hospitals from suing patients who owe under $500. And so the thing about these lawsuits is that there's this real asymmetry in terms of the cost of these lawsuits. You would have hospitals going to court with lawsuits for $10,000 and $1,000, and they've already got their attorney there. So for them to add a lawsuit for $250, no real cost. But for a patient who owes $250 and can't afford it, to take a day off from work, all the emotional trauma going into court, it's a huge cost, and it's a cost way beyond the $250 that they already couldn't pay. And so this has been since 2020, we've had these trying to get bills through that sort of limit lawsuits, at a certain threshold. And we're the second state in the country to do this. And so that's always really exciting as well. Now, I like being first, but being second is also good because now it's a trend and other people can follow. Now it's not just an anomaly, it's a trend. So that was some of the work that we did on medical debt, and Delegate Embry did a bunch of work on that as well. She's going to add a couple of other pieces. I'm going to shift to energy. And I think folks are probably aware that energy burdens in this state, as with the rest of the country, are really debilitating and devastating to families. Energy prices are going up for a whole host of reasons that I'm not going to get into right now because it's a complex set of of reasons, but all of them actually can be tied back to corporate greed and shareholder profit. And if anyone's interested in my analysis of that in detail, I have a bunch of other podcasts that I've done on the topic of energy prices and how we got here. But what I'll say is this: at the beginning of this session, the primary bill that we had that was kind of the big energy bill that we had was hugely problematic in that what it did, its sort of solution to energy prices was to streamline the permitting process for natural gas. And specifically, that streamlining was going to include skipping over environmental justice protections. And not only was that not going to lead to lowering energy prices in the state, but it was also going to lead potentially to hugely problematic environmental justice outcomes, and of course, moving our climate goals backwards. But what ended up happening is, and again, because of the work done by many people on this call, advocates around the state, legislators who really organized and advocated within all of the committees, not just the committees that had energy jurisdiction, is we ended up with actually a very strong bill that will absolutely move the needle on structurally changing rate making in a way that will stabilize and eventually keep energy prices from increasing. And so I'll just mention a couple of the things that it does. One is that it addresses our resource adequacy by fast tracking battery storage. Battery storage is the cheapest way to address increases in peak load. And so by fast tracking battery storage, instead of building gas plants to respond to peak load, we can respond very quickly to the load issues, the load growth in Maryland in a low cost way. The second thing that we did is that we got a handle on two things that were really driving up distribution costs, which is the way that the rate making was happening. One of them is Stride, which was Delegate Embry's bill, which she'll talk a little more about, and the other is what's called multi-year rate making. And both of those, in effect, was giving the utilities a way to rapidly increase their investments, and in some cases, investments that were not necessary, but that ratepayers would be paying for with a 9% rate of return over 20 to 50 years. So really reining in those two are really important. Now we won't see the impact of those two changes right away on our bills, but we will see them over time. The third thing that we did is setting up a new rate class for data centers. There's a real concern that as data centers get built, that the improvements to the grid that are necessary to be able to serve their load will end up being paid for by residential ratepayers. And so we put into place processes to keep that from happening. The fourth area is really interesting. We found that BG&E's in-house labor, which is unionized labor, would a project that's done by in-house labor would cost much less in a lot of cases than projects that were done by contractual labor, contractors. And in some cases, there were pole replacements that were sort of twice as expensive when they were done by contractors. And so you had this situation where you weren't necessarily having workers earning more money, but you had ratepayers paying more. And so we were able to both, protect and work with the in-house unions, and change the way that contractual work gets incorporated into utilities in a way that'll save money for ratepayers over time. And the last thing I'll mention, and this is just, again, this is the icing on the cake. Most of the things that I've mentioned so far are the structural changes that'll make a difference. But one of the things that really captured people's imagination this year is the fact that right now, ratepayers pay for the private jets of the Exelon executives. And so while that's probably not the thing that's really driving up prices, it is emblematic of the waste of the money, the precious ratepayer money, going towards private jets to places that Southwest flies to perfectly fine. Thank you very much. And so we banned the use of ratepayer money for private jets. So there were other pieces in this bill that I talk about as sort of 80% phenomenal, 15% okay, and 5% not great, but not really the end of the world. And from what it started at, I think it is really going to be a game changer in terms of the energy future and in protecting ratepayers. And so I was really proud to work on that. And I'll stop there and I'll take questions when we get to the Q&A.
Great. Thank you so much, Delegate Embry.
Thank you. Marceline, thank you for having me, and thank you, Economic Action. It is such a pleasure and an honor to serve with Delegate Charkoudian. She is the person I go to on all kinds of subjects, and she is the leader in the General Assembly on these issues, especially energy policy. So you're lucky to hear from her, and I'm lucky to speak after her. So I'll talk about a couple bills also in medical debt context. I'll touch on Stride, although I think it's been beautifully described, and then a couple disappointments from session in the consumer action field. The first of the medical debt bill that I did, Marceline White came to me a couple of years ago and said, other states are looking at protecting a person's home from medical debt collection. And so let's try to do that. And so our first year we put in a bill. It was a good bill, but we learned in trying to pass it the first year, 2 years ago, that in fact in Maryland, all money judgments, all debt collection is converted automatically or virtually automatically into a lien on a person's property in whatever the jurisdiction is of the judgment. And so the bill did not get out of the Senate, which was fine because we took the interim and worked with the judiciary and our partners in the AG's office and legal aid to make it better. And so we've now, with the judiciary, worked out that there can be a process so that it's not automatic. And so the bill passed and will prohibit a lien from being placed on a person's primary residence for medical debt. And I think also understanding and legislating in this automatic conversion area opens up the way for other legislation protecting people from debt collection. So that was exciting. And again, Marceline, her idea, her brainchild, and it was a pleasure to work with her. The other piece I want to mention of that is we ran into medical credit cards. Also third-party debt collection, but that is what it is. But medical credit cards are a real problem. They're growing in popularity. They're pushed in some cases by doctors' offices as a way to get money up front, understandably, but there's a lot of usury issues. They're being investigated by attorneys general in other states. So I hope to work with Marceline maybe on a bill, and Senator Love was the cross-filer who was amazing, maybe on a bill that looks specifically and is addressed to medical credit. Another great bill, Delegate Polakovich-Carr had a really good bill that echoed the CFPB order or rule that prohibited credit reporting from considering medical debt. And so that did pass, which is so great, especially because the CFPB is being dismantled. And so will not probably, that protection will not exist at the federal level, but it exists in Maryland. So that was a big win. She also struggled with this medical credit card universe, but we're going to work on that. A few things that the Judiciary Committee did that in this realm are passing a bill finally that prohibits the suspension of a driver's license for child support arrearages if the person who owes the child support earns, I think it's 250% of federal poverty guidelines or less. And so that's been a long time coming, but that's a really big deal for allowing usually fathers, but not always, sometimes mothers, to actually have use of their vehicle while seeking work and not being suspended and unable to contribute to their child's welfare. There's also enormous amounts of inaccuracy in the suspensions. So it's a roundabout way of getting at that. We also passed a few criminal justice bills, medical and geriatric reform, parole reform, which again, long time coming, really important. That was Senator Hedelman and Delegate Bartlett. And then also the Second Look Act, which allows people who have been sentenced to extremely lengthy sentences to have a judge consider whether circumstances have changed since their original sentencing. So those are a few in judiciary. A bill that I had that I was disappointed. I've had 2 years in a row, and Marceline has been a big supporter, but it's failed and is even more important now given the Trump administration and the end of the CFPB is empowering our local consumer protection agencies. We have 3 in Maryland, Baltimore City, Montgomery County, and Howard County have all created local consumer protection offices with local laws, but they are limited to a 1-year statute of limitations right now under their charters. And so this bill would extend it to 3 years and also create a standard that it's when the government knew or should reasonably have known. It's a big deal. These cases they're taking on are really complex and important, interesting cases, and they need certainly more than a year to investigate them. So passed the House twice and got on the voting list for the Senate. So maybe next year we'll get it across the finish line. And then just to finally, I'll just touch on Stride, which was such a pleasure to work on. It was a bill that was the brainchild of David Lapp, our Office of People's Counsel, who I'm sure everyone on here knows, and Emily Scar and Marceline and just a ton of people, our Attorney General, just so many people, so many groups, Cara, SEIU, everyone you would imagine was really supportive. And the first year we introduced it, it was voted unfavorably out of committee. We thought, well, we got to try again. But thanks to a lot of people and a lot of pushing, and Delegate Charkoudian, and the fact that gas prices were skyrocketing, it was part of the energy package. And so it was just a real honor to work on that. It's not my committee, so thank you to everyone who allowed me to work on it. But I learned a lot about energy policy also on the morning runs and walks with Delegate Charkoudian in the running caucus. So with that, I'll stop talking, but I'm so honored again to be here and happy to answer questions.
Thank you both so much for your work and for being here tonight. Really appreciate everything you do in Annapolis and on the ground in the interim. So I'm going to turn to, I think we're showing our agenda, and a little bit of what I want to do is like how it started and how it ended. But each year we come up with a legislative agenda focused on issues that we think are important, and we're either hearing from clients or there's been a model bill in another state, or really what I think about is kitchen table issues, kind of bread and butter issues, the things people struggle, the things my family struggled with, figuring out which bill to pay each month and what you put off. And so it's really housing, utilities, debt, how to get out of debt, how to afford things that provide upward mobility, like student loans and college, those kinds of food, right? Right now, those kinds of issues are really the kinds of things we're looking at and focusing on some areas where we can support our colleagues who are leading and in other areas where we can lead. So that's that. That's that slide. So let's move on. We try to look at where we can have the most impact and where it'll benefit the most people and where there's a disparate impact on majority Black and Brown communities. Especially, I live in Baltimore City and our office is based here. So we know that, the policies of redlining you still see throughout the city in health impacts, in tree canopy, in asthma rates, everything. And so really making sure that the policies also are trying to repair some of the long-term damage from the redlining in those policies. So this is what we came into this session with, working on medical debt, protecting energy ratepayers, um, expanding housing justice, and expanding financial justice, as well as standing with our allies. This year, we wanted to make sure that we are supporting and uplifting our colleagues and partner organizations that were fighting for immigrants' rights, for trans rights, for disability rights, as well, and putting some more strength and power behind that this year. I'd say the general picture is that the left side, or my left side of this picture, we did really well. As you heard, lots of great things passed around medical debt. And I'm actually part of a national, I'm a contributor to a national paper on medical debt that's being released next week. So I'll be meeting with state advocates and national advocates next week to talk about what else we can be doing in the states. So I'm sure I'll be talking to both delegates and others about what else we can be doing after that report's released. But we worked on, those all went really well. Obviously, you heard about the energy ratepayer bills. The bill to ban the private jet, we're actually fourth in the nation. So again, I also like being first, but fourth means it's a trend. So trying to make sure that the companies pay for those kinds of things and their membership association fees themselves. Um, and then this is what happened. Medical debt you've heard about, and energy policy you've heard about. So where we have some good, but a little less, is around housing justice. So we supported the Community Development Network on a bill that would raise for the foreclosure filing fee. And the goal of this bill was really both to make it a little more expensive for for them to foreclose, for servicers or the mortgage holders to foreclose on people, because it's very inexpensive in in Maryland to do that. So to give them a little bit of a pause and try to work out something with the homeowner. But sort of more importantly, it raises some funding that goes into housing counseling, will support financial services and legal services, which hopefully will help people be able to remain in their home or to exit with dignity. And that's important because right now, Maryland is the fourth in the nation in terms of notices of intent to foreclose. Not all of those become foreclosures. A lot of them get worked out, but it's still something to be concerned about, particularly with the economic crunch we're going into this summer, with lots of rising bills and wages being stagnant, coupled with job loss. So we want to be engaging on that as well. So I'd say that's one of the other good things that came out. And then I said I would go and talk a little bit about, maybe not bad, but I'd say some good bills that weakened, passed in weakened form, or only passed one chamber. So one of those was the Tenant Protection Act. And the original goal was to provide tenants with 14 days notice of the eviction date, and then 10 days that the tenants could keep their possessions in the rental unit before the landlord could throw it out. I mean, basically giving people time to find a new place to live and to make arrangements to get their possessions out of the rental unit. And so 48 other states require a notice of the date of eviction, and 35 other states have some window for tenants to reclaim their personal property after an eviction, ranging from like 7 to 90 days. So the bill passed the House in that form, but then when it was amended in the Senate, it was amended down to provide 6 days of notice, and the right to protect your possessions was removed. So that's one of the areas where there's lots more work to do on tenants, and I'll talk about another bill in a few minutes. But that's one that we're glad that there's now notice joining 46 other states, but we believe that tenants should not have their possessions possibly thrown out. So that's something that needs more work. A good bill that made it through one chamber was around fair housing, and that was with Senator Sidner and Delegate Bartlett. Um, basically, fair housing testers in other states can record when they're talking to landlords or apartment property management companies to test and see if there's discrimination based on race, gender, sexual identity, disability, any of the protected classes. This is best practices. It's recommended by HUD, and 39 other states allow that kind of one-party recording. Maryland doesn't allow one-party recording, and it's something that people feel very strongly about. So the bill passed out of the Senate, but it did not get a hearing on the House side. And again, I think it's something that, for lots of reasons, people feel really strongly about um, allowing one party recordings. So it did not move. We're hoping next year. Um, and there was a bill also around housing, around the statute of limitations. And this was Delegate Dana Jones. And it would have created a statute of limitations for foreclosures, giving mortgage service companies, giving mortgage holders up to 10 years to foreclose, which would bring Maryland in line with Virginia and some of the surrounding states. Um, we are one of 3 states that do not have a statute of limitations for foreclosure. And it also would have put some protections in if somebody was trying to foreclose without appropriate documentation to deal with zombie mortgage debt foreclosure. And again, that bill passed the House, but it did not get a vote in the Senate Judicial Proceedings Committee. So those were two that, moved, but not all the way. And then another bill, a consumer protection bill that moved, and again, very good bill, was amended a bit, was a consumer contract bill, and that was with Delegate Von Stewart and Senator Jeff Waldstrecker, HB 431. And the goal was just to say that any consumer contracts that set a shorter time to bring an action than what's required under Maryland law would be void, and that if someone tried to do that, it would be a violation of Maryland's Consumer Protection Act. And the bill did pass, but in the Senate, it created a series of exclusions for a number of businesses that contract with the state, as well as public utilities are excluded from this. And it got rid of making it a violation of the Consumer Protection Act. So it did pass, but in a weakened amended form. And then a couple of the bills I just wanted to say we were very disappointed about. Two that passed and one that didn't. The one that didn't pass, I think many folks are familiar with, which is the good cause eviction bill, which has passed the House a number of times. And that simply says that it would be enabling legislation, so local jurisdictions could pass these laws saying that landlords would have to provide a reason for eviction. And it passed the House, but in the Senate, there were amendments that said the localities basically had to choose. Either you could have rent stabilization, or you could have this good cause legislation around, you know, having protecting people from being evicted erratically. But you can't have both. And so for that reason, advocates thought that was a Faustian bargain and it did not move forward. So that will come back. And then two other bills that I just want to mention that we are not happy about. The first is a bill called, it's House Bill 1516 and Senate Bill 1026, and this was called the Maryland Secondary Market Act. And what it essentially did, it was at the request of the Office of Financial Regulation to create a category of trust called passive trust for mortgages that would be exempt from registration, licensing, regulation, and enforcement. And so this was really brought at the behest of Rocket Mortgage and some other companies like that. And Rocket until recently was being sued by the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau for illegal kickbacks. So, in its original form, it was written very broadly so that it could have rolled back consumer protections for a whole range of installment loan products and credit projects. There's lots of work and support from folks in economic matters and elsewhere to amend the bill to a much narrower definition so it only deals with these certain kinds of secondary mortgages. Um, but there are still some concerns that, where there's a loophole, there's likely a bad actor who might take advantage of the loophole. So we're still very concerned about this loss of oversight and protection. And then the final bill that I want to mention is it was House Bill 1294, and that's around earned wage access products. And those are essentially products where you work with a company, it's often an app, so it's a fintech kind of thing, where you will pay fees and possibly a tip in order to withdraw your own money before payday. And the problem with this is that when you calculate the fees and the tips, first of all, it exceeds Maryland's rate cap for small consumer loans, which is 33%, which we've had historically for decades. And that rate cap has kept payday lenders out of Maryland. Lots of other states, 100%, 300% interest. Our 33% rate cap, which some would argue is still too high, has kept those, you know, those actors out of Maryland. This is going to go over our rate cap. And Maryland will be the first state that has had a historic rate cap to allow these kinds of fintech payday actors in. So it's very concerning, both for what it may do for our consumers. When we've looked at people who've been using them, it's an app. A lot of people will, you borrow $200 this week, and then 2 weeks later, you have to pay back the $200. Plus, whether it's interest or you've already paid fees, or if you've had to pay extra to expedite it, it adds up, and so you're in the hole. And so many people are borrowing 100 times a year. So that really is a huge loss for low-income working people from these kind of high-tech payday loans. So there is an effort trying to see if Governor will veto the bill, and I don't know what the status is, but folks have been reaching out to him to see both because it's bad for Maryland working families, but also because it sets a really bad message for the rest of the country if we're the first state, a blue state that is now going to allow these kind of payday loans in the state. So we'll see what happens. Um, and um, and I think we are right at time to open it up for questions. I know Jennifer has been watching the chat. So, Jennifer, I don't know if you want to read out some questions for us.
Thank you. And so just a reminder again to everyone who is with us, please do put your questions in the chat. I know it's a lot of information, a lot of bill numbers. We will be sharing the full list of bill numbers, so I hope no one was frantically taking down notes. And a huge thank you again to both our speakers for joining us here.
And I have questions if we don't have if we want to kick stuff off, but if you have questions, please let the audience ask away.
Yes, why don't you kick off and
Okay.
we'll give everyone a chance to start filling out that Q&A as we go.
Okay. Sounds good. I think one question I have for both of you is just what surprised you the most about the session? Um, yeah.
You want me to go first? What an interesting question. Um, Gosh, I think I think it was a challenging session. I don't know that that was a surprise. I think that um, it was a constantly shifting session because we were responding to changes from the federal government. Um, and so it was difficult to, we were waiting on and not sure and still not sure in trying to be creative in responding. I mean, one of the things that you saw was a lot of bills, including parts of mine, including Delegate Plakovich-Carr's bill that was, sort of kind of going like, oh, well, we may not have a Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. And so what can we take that's in federal protection now and put it into state law? Um, I don't know that any of that is a surprise, but I sort of share it as like it kept us on our toes. There was a lot of sort of fast moving stuff at the federal level. Everyone's head is spinning, and so we're going, is there something that we can do at the state level, either directly to address that or creatively to try to take care of people in Maryland, given that. And so it was a very sort of fast moving and things changing very quickly. And still now, I'm in this space of like, what are the creative things that we can do with state power? Clearly having and supporting the Attorney General to sue on everything. But what are the other creative things that we can do in our communities and then preparing for next session? How do we continue to protect Marylanders and set the bar and the path for other states to protect residents, even in areas where the federal government is failing us?
I think that was exactly right. And this is my first term, so every year is sort of a surprise in a sense. Um, I mean, I know we've talked about the energy package, but I was really proud to be part of the General Assembly. I mean, that was a bill that usually bills come in strong and get weaker and over time, but this was a bill that came in, as Delegate Charkoudian explained, came in with some real problems, and really wasn't addressing, I think, the problems that our Marylanders were seeing. And thanks to Lorig and thanks to other people, but mainly her, um, it turned into a really good package of legislation. So I was just proud to be, part of a body that did that. And the House was, I'm going to just say it, I think the House was the leader on that. So yeah, I don't know if surprise is the right word, but
Yeah.
it was awesome.
Well, I know the other thing, and Delegate Charkoudian, you touched on this, but we're still like roiling, right? We're still trying to figure out what's happening at the federal level on all the things we care about. We know that many federal workers have been affected or are in sort of a liminal space, or not knowing what's happening with their jobs and their positions. And I know Maryland did some good work last year with with the federal workers package. It's early days. But are either of you, what are you all thinking? We're going into next year with budget challenges and this enormous need. And, you don't have to have any answers right now. We still haven't finished, seeing the final bill signings, but I'd just love to hear a little bit about your thoughts as you're thinking, as you're starting to think about next session and if we have a September or another budget session.
Yeah, I do want to say one significant failure of this year is that we didn't fix unemployment insurance. And so, unemployment insurance, the maximum benefit level is $430, and it's been that way since 2010. And despite the significant inflation that's occurred since 2010. And so think about that. That's for the maximum you could get. So regardless of what your paycheck was, high, low, whatever in between, the maximum you're going to get is $430 a week. And so what that means is that people who are losing their jobs, whether from directly from the federal government, federal contractors, people who live in communities, it's like it's a company town and we just lost our plant, right?
Right.
the circular impact of the economy. And so what that means is then when people become unemployed, the lower unemployment benefit levels are, the more people end up in debt, the more people are preyed upon by the debt collection. It's like all of the pieces, the more people are likely to come out on the other end of their spell of unemployment, in danger of losing their home, whether through eviction or foreclosure. And so all of those implications, and unemployment insurance has clearly been shown to be a really effective counter-cyclical economic tool to the broader economy. So there's all these reasons to increase unemployment insurance. And I'll tell you the reason that we didn't is because the way that the unemployment trust fund is funded is a tax on a portion of payroll. And that portion of payroll is called the taxable wage base. So in order for our trust fund to stay solvent and for us to increase from 430, my bill increased it to $750 a week. In order for that to happen, we have to increase. So here's the deal. Taxable wage base was set at $8,500 in 1992, and it has not increased since then. And so there was no proposal to increase tax rates, but the proposal was to take the $1992 amount and update it to $2025 amount. And that is what the Chamber of Commerce, NFIB, and the Retailers Association fought against and have been fighting against for the last many years. And so just so people understand, that would be like me saying we have a 6% sales tax, and I would like to pay that 6% sales tax on 1992 prices. And if you make me pay that on 2025 prices, then I'm going to fight you and say you're raising my taxes, right? We expect to pay taxes, whatever the rates are, and we can think they're too high or too low or whatever, on prices for today. And yet, because this was set in 92, the pushback on adjusting the benefit level, which would require adjusting the taxable wage base, was businesses who said that's an increase in taxes. And I refuse to acknowledge that as an increase in taxes because it is an update of the amount that we're taxing on to current levels for 2025. So because of that, we came very, very close to passing an increase in unemployment insurance taxes. But because of that pushback from these groups, ultimately we didn't end up passing it. And folks need to know that. Unfortunately, people are going to find that out when they end up unemployed and file for benefits and start receiving these very low amounts. I think the biggest challenge is that unemployment insurance is one of those things, like a lot of things that we work on, where people don't realize how devastatingly problematic the situation is until they're in it. Unemployment insurance is not a sexy thing to work on, but when you need it, and then you find out that it's $430, and then you're in real trouble. So I do hope that folks, I'm going to keep pushing for it in the special session if we have a special session, in the next session if we have it. And I do hope that folks who are really concerned about these issues join us in really pushing hard on that.
And go ahead, Delegate Embry, and then I think we've got some questions too.
Great. I just wanted to, we've heard a lot about Medicaid. So we know the federal government is going to be making changes of some kind and how they, in either the allocation of how much the states have to contribute or who's eligible or work study. So we're going to see changes in Medicaid, and that will be a challenge for the state. We also, and my day job is at the University of Maryland, Trump has proposed to eliminate federal work study funding, other available sources of funding for students. And so obviously our state is very dependent and invested in our universities, private and public. So I think we as a state have to look at, what can we do to support them? Hopkins, our largest employer, is, facing $1 billion in losses and laying people off. So anyway, just something I know lots of people are focused on, but will be an issue next session. And finally, housing availability. There were efforts this year that really didn't go very far in looking at how we can increase the supply of housing overall, but also affordable housing, which I think everyone in this call prioritizes. So I hope we can do better next year and be creative. Marceline, as you're an expert, and I know you watched some of the bills that had promised just get weakened, but those are some areas. Yeah, I don't have any magic solutions. We depend on federal dollars. It's going to hurt.
Great, thank you. Jennifer, you said there are some questions.
Yeah, so we've got some really great questions in the chat, some slightly more broad and some more specific. So I'll start with the broader ones. One question that we as advocates always ask also to both the delegates, do you feel that you hear from Maryland residents enough, especially on these issues, and that there's enough support for the good bills? And if not, what more could the everyday person do to help get these bills across the finish line?
I think groups like Economic Action are incredibly effective at bringing those perspectives to the table in a way that is very genuine and data-based. It is helpful, I think, as I mean, everyone here knows, for delegates to hear from their constituents. And so, as much work as we can do to get people to be outspoken in parts of the state that maybe don't have, like Baltimore City, Montgomery County have really great, wonderful advocates, but just spreading that out around. But I think groups like Economic Action work on that. I don't know. I feel I hear a lot from my constituents and from the groups in the city that care about these issues. So I don't feel personally that there's more that I or the city delegation needs to hear, but I am not a delegate from the Eastern Shore or from Southern Maryland, so I don't know.
Yeah, I have a very active community. I actually have people who uh, text me during hearings that they're simultaneously watching and to give me questions that I, could ask, which is pretty cool. And so people are definitely paying attention in District 20, and I love it. I love representing this community. I think that what I actually recommend also, in addition to continuing to hold me accountable and the others in District 20, I also recommend that people like think of where you have friends in the state. And you might have a friend in on the Eastern Shore in Carroll County or somewhere where we need votes that isn't necessarily politically active, but they like you, right? And that you can say, listen, are you willing when I give you something? We need this vote in the Economic Matters Committee. Are you willing to call your person? And so whoever you are listening to this call might have a delegate who, you talk to all the time and generally you can count on their vote, but maybe you have a friend in a place where you don't have that sort of a arrangement. And so I always, recommend to my constituents that they both continue to engage with me, but also they adopt, find someone somewhere where we need votes. And if that person trusts you, then you can call them, in that crunch time and say, call your delegate and tell them we need your vote on this.
Wonderful. Thank you. So the time has gotten away from me a bit. We have a couple of really great questions. Some of them are very technical, so we'll answer them in the follow-up materials. A great question on House Bill 1516 and some national efforts that are happening. The last question is sort of for you, Marceline. So I think it's a great way to give you a chance to close it off, and I'll share the slide with our contact information.
Okay.
But will we have a list? Will Economic Action have a list of sort of the failed bills that everyone on this call could start reaching out to their legislators this summer? So a great segue to the next steps people can take.
That is a great question. Yeah, I wrote stuff up before this webinar just so that I wasn't just going off the top of my head because I have a lot to say about all of them. So I was trying to stay on task. So I think what we can do is like send stuff out to folks. And obviously we want to be touching base with the legislators first to make sure they're going to bring the bills back. I think in many cases they are, and in many cases they'd already indicated they were, but just to confirm that. And then, yes, I think this is a great time to start meeting with your legislators about, the failed bills or the bills that passed one chamber and saying you really want to see them make it over the finish line. And we're happy to talk to folks and, happy to share information and next steps. So we'll be sending out the bills that everyone talked about in the next few days, as well as some info about if you want action alerts or, talking points and things like that to stay engaged. So those are all the ways to reach us, and that's my email. Um, I really want to thank Delegate Charkoudian, Delegate Embry. We appreciate all your insights and your thoughts, and you both know I'm going to be reaching out to you to look at bills that we can do more on next session, probably pretty soon. But this is great, and we'll share the recording with everybody so people who couldn't make it, if they've registered, we'll send it to them so they can still hear all your thoughts and insights. So I want to thank everybody for taking time out of their evening to have this conversation and look forward to continuing it. So thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.